Learn it here first or risk finding out after everyone else.
This is Richmond's Morning News with Rich Herrera on News Radio WRVA.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. 7:33 here on Richmond's Morning News on News Radio WRVA. So, I've got a website, rich4america.com, rich, the number 4america.com. We get tips on things that people want us to talk about, things that are important to you here in the greater Richmond area through Central Virginia. And I had somebody ask me about the Sue Smith landfill and what's been going on over there. So I did a little bit of research, and I'm trying to get to the bottom of this. So I'm asking help from a member of the House of Delegates, Glen Sturtevant, friend of this program, to come on and kind of tell us where we are, what's going on, and what they're doing to try to mitigate the issue there. And he's kind enough to join us this morning at 7:34 here on News Radio WRVA. Good morning, sir.
Hey, good morning, Rich.
Appreciate you making time for us this morning. So, Chesterfield County, Virginia Department of Environmental Quality Control, looking at what's going on down there. For the listeners that aren't sure exactly what we're talking about throughout the region, can you give us a little bit of a background of this story?
Yeah, the thumbnail of this is Sue Smith landfill was a landfill that operated in Chesterfield for many, many years. Several years ago, it went into Chapter 7 bankruptcy. They kind of ran the business into the ground. And so they stopped taking trash, but there's obviously still decades of trash that are there at the landfill. A few years ago, Chesterfield learned or determined that it appeared that what's called leachate. So when rainwater mixes with the trash that's in the landfill, it creates dirty, contaminated water. The county determined that it appeared that Sue Smith was improperly dumping or releasing that leachate. And so the county pulled the Sue Smith's discharge permit that required them to start trucking this dirty water off the site. And so fast forward to about 3 weeks ago, we were, those of us in the legislature and the Chesterfield delegation were informed that this bankrupt landfill is about to run out of money. It could run out of money in as soon as a couple of months in August. And it's a potential environmental emergency if there's not the money to deal with this leachate that is being created on the property. And so those of us in the Chesterfield delegation were informed that, hey, we need $50 million to deal with this bankrupt landfill wastewater problem. I started asking questions and sent a letter to Department of Environmental Quality and the state and local folks and said, why are we finding out about this now? Session ended in March. Were the Democrats in the legislature in a budget stalemate. Asking us for $50 million is not really a serious way to deal with this. Is EPA even involved? And so I'm still waiting on an answer to my questions from the state agencies. I've heard from Chesterfield. But that's kind of the big picture of where we are.
What have you heard from Chesterfield?
Well, I've heard from Chesterfield that they were the ones that identified that the Sue Smith landfill was potentially improperly dumping this leachate water. They pulled their permit. They asked the state for additional tools and powers to be able to try to oversee and regulate these guys. It sounds like they were told no by the state. But at the end of the day, we are now in a situation where they're about to run out of the money that they were supposed to set aside for dealing with problems like this during the bankruptcy period. And we get this kind of 11th hour emergency request for $50 million, which, the federal government can spend $50 million very easily when you can print the money at the state level. $50 million is real money. That's not a serious request without some sort of plan and plan in place. So I'm trying to get all the relevant parties together at a table to come up with a plan so that we can get this dealt with and solved very, very quickly. Those of us in the Chesterfield delegation are meeting with the bankruptcy trustee later today to get some more information. But it's kind of it's a real challenge. You got all these government agencies and entities at various levels that are supposed to prevent this kind of thing from happening. It's not totally clear to me that anybody's running point and is quarterbacking this thing. I'm trying to get everybody to kind of come to Jesus and say we got to get this thing fixed ASAP and get all the relevant parties at the table.
Glen Sturtevant joining us this morning here on News Radio WRVA at 739. I'll be honest, I'm even more confused now than I was when we started this conversation. So a couple things. Who's asking for the money? If you get the $50 million, where does that go? How do they get rid of this leachate, the sludge that you get that comes out of the rainwater mixing with the decomposing garbage in this dump?
Well, it's Department of Environmental Quality. It's the state. It's the county are asking for this money.
Both of them together.
I think that's right.
Okay.
And the idea is to have additional money to allow the landfill to keep trucking this leachate off the property. And so,
is that a Band-Aid or is that a long-term solution?
No, it's a total Band-Aid.
Okay.
The estimates we're getting is that the lifetime cost of sort of formally shutting down this landfill over time is like $173 million. But that's really kind of the challenge is there's not a real serious plan in place as far as I can tell. And this is, why we have entities like DEQ and EPA, why they exist is to prevent things like this from happening. And we're now, 2 months out from potentially running out of money and just asking for more. And so, a taxpayer bailout of this landfill cannot and should not be the answer. And so we're trying to get the responsible parties to get this thing squared away sooner rather than later.
Okay, I got two questions for you then, Glenn. And I appreciate you helping me kind of expose this and shine the light on it. Number one, I think you do need to grab everybody, put them together in one room and go, all right, let's get the bureaucracy out of the way because we got to protect the folks in Chesterfield County. So two questions for me that I have this morning. Is this normal? Does this normally happen when you have a landfill that's no longer active, but it still has everything in there? I for the most part, I thought we just kind of put the dirt over the top of it and made sure that everything wasn't escaping, and then you do whatever you do with that land. It becomes brown land, not green land, but and the environmentalist taught me that the other day. But is this normal that you have a situation like this?
Well, I'm not a landfill expert, so, but, I think generally speaking, the county identified that this particular landfill, at least, was causing this leachate, this dirty, contaminated water. It's being created there. They're having to truck it out currently. They previously had a permit to discharge it into the wastewater system so that it could be appropriately treated.
Right.
But now that discharge permit has been pulled and they have to truck it off, it's where a lot of the money that had been set aside to formally close this landfill has been going. It's been paying to truck this stuff off
right
the site. So, whatever the long-term closure procedures are for this landfill, I think that remains to be seen, which is part of the problem.
Okay, now this makes sense.
That plan is.
This makes sense because we've had listeners text us this morning. It's Chesterfield County that took away their permit that forced all of this. Do we know why Chesterfield County took away the permit to discharge this water into the wastewater treatment system?
Well, so what Chesterfield County has said and the public reporting that I have seen on it is it appears that Chesterfield County made the determination that Shoesmith was improperly or illegally or, dumping the leachate water. And so that resulted in Chesterfield pulling their discharge permit, which has now resulted in the landfill having to truck that water off the site.
I'd be interested. I'm not going to ask you this question, but we're going to do some more investigating into this. Why can't they just get right with Chesterfield County and get that permit reissued? Or is it because there's really nobody running the place right now because they're in Chapter 7? I think that's something that I'm going to look into. You mentioned one thing. We only have a minute here. I thought this was a biohazard. You are using the term emergency. What's the difference between something that's kind of a hazard and where we're at this point with Chesterfield County? We got to get this thing cleaned up, and we got to get it cleaned up right now.
Yeah, Chesterfield and the relevant agencies have said drinking water is safe, everything's good. I think the public is rightly entitled to additional testing and a public awareness of what those test results are. We need to make sure that it's not just the county drinking water, but it's also well water that is protected and that is safe. But I think that the issue that we are facing right now is those of us in the legislature got a heads up a couple of weeks ago that this is coming to a head in potentially as soon as a couple of months, and they could run out of money in as soon as August. And so the time is of the essence for the state, local, and federal folks to get in the same room, get a plan together, figure out what the funding is going to look like so that this can get squared away and fixed before the landfill runs out of money. And then there needs to be a very close look at how did they get here, who is responsible, and how are we going to protect the taxpayers, and how are we going to protect their infrastructure and their water.
Glenn, I'm going to talk about you in front of you like I would behind your back. Here's what I'm going to tell people. Serious times call for serious people. And that's why I'm glad that Glen Sturtevant's on top of this, trying to bring all of these people together. Honestly, I trust you to get everybody in one room and say, okay, guys, what are we going to do to fix this? You're a serious person for a serious time, and I'm glad you're on top of this. If you don't mind, let's keep in touch and update us so we can let the listeners know, particularly the folks down in Chesterfield County, where we have so many great listeners, of what's going on. And I just thank you for coming on and kind of explaining all of this to me.
Yep, very good. Thank you, Rich.
All right, take care. Glen Sturtevant joining us here on News Radio WRVA. Again, serious times call for serious people. He is absolutely on top of this. Get all of those people together. And I would like to, I don't know the answer. I'm not pointing any fingers at Chesterfield County. How do they get right where they can use the wastewater? $50 million is a Band-Aid, $173 million of taxpayer bailout. Doesn't seem like it's the most prudent thing we could do with their tax dollars. Anyway, we'll stay on top of this. Thanks to Glen Sturtevant for joining us here on News Radio WRVA. All right, today's program